Good morning and welcome to the Weebscast, a podcast for many geeks and weeboos alike. Today seems like it's going to be a great day for just talking. Don't you think, Sahit?
Definitely, John, especially about the topics we're bringing up today.
Today's topic is going to be on how personal lifestyles and individuality of people today can promote racial stereotypes from the past.
We know that this topic is a bit more controversial, but bear with us as we talk about some different scenarios. Alright, so our first argument is that in the recent international meeting between the Swedish government and the Iranian government, the female-dominant Swedish government is a complete hypocrite. Like, honestly, they stand for women's rights in Europe, but when they meet with the Iranian government, all of the women wore hijabs. And yeah, you could say that's like a sign of respecting the Iranian culture, but almost every single women's rights activist in the Middle East told them not to do so. Despite being told by many other women's rights activists, they still did it.
Wow, that is hypocritical.
Yeah, definitely, John. I don't care what your history or personality is like, but if you wear a hijab, you're promoting thousands of years of sexism and violence against women in the Islamic communities. If you're a free country with no laws saying that you have to follow Sharia law, and yet you still wear a hijab, and then simply state, oh, it's just a personal choice, you're not an equal rights activist. You're just a promoter of the unfair treatment women have had in the Middle East for thousands of years. Yes, on the other side of the argument, telling a woman what not to wear or telling anyone what not to wear is also considered a form of oppression. People do have a choice to their own body and what they want to wear. But if I wear a t-shirt saying that Hitler was right or that we should abolish the 13th Amendment, that's basically the same thing as wearing a hijab promoting thousands of years of oppressing women.
Wow, that reminds me of something, but I can't remember the name. It's on the tip of my tongue.
I think I know what you're going to say. This reminds me of A Rose for Emily, doesn't it?
Yeah, how'd you know?
Well, the idea of oppressing women for such a long time kind of became a habit in that story. It's like similar to the relationship of Emily and her father. You could say that her father represents the Islamic culture and Emily represents all women. After being controlled by her father for years, Emily really can't behave normally after her father's death, and isolation is normal to her now, and it's like a habit, which is much similar to wearing a hijab. Like the quote, she would have to cling to that which had robbed her, as people will. Once exposed to free will, most people will stick with old habits, and it's really hard for them to change.
This is certainly interesting, but I also know another example of these racial practices. I was reading an article about how Hispanics were viewed in different movies made by Americans. Hispanics were portrayed as a more violent and ruthless group of individuals in American-made films. During the first 2 decades of U.S. filmmaking, the Hispanic stereotypes were the bandito, the buffoon, the gangster. In these films, they were also the ones to be killed, mocked, or punished by the usually white protagonists. This gave them a reputation that doesn't give them a nice and warm feeling. They were treated as if they were always the enemy or villain in these movies, and that reflects on our world today. Whenever you listen to some bad news on the Hispanics, you might hear stuff about the cartel, drug dealers, crossing the border illegally, etc. You know what this reminds me of? The life narrative of Frederick Douglass. Frederick Douglass was also part of a minority, and he was also treated like a complete tool. They were just seen as workers who were driven to death. There's an excerpt from his narrative that actually shows how he was mistreated, and I quote, "He came to the spot, and after looking at me a while, asked me what was the matter. I told him as well as I could, for I scarce had strength to speak. He then gave me a savage kick to the side, and told me to get up. I tried to do so, but fell back in an attempt. He gave me another kick and told me to rise. This is just to show how people mistreat other groups based off of their race."
A simple pigment of the skin, and you're not even seen as human anymore. Well, in recent times, there has been a lifestyle of people thinking that they're thugs, quote unquote. When people dress up and act like the 1900s gang members, this simply reminds the public of how dangerous and bad those times and people were, and they would most likely want to avoid those type of people to avoid any bad accidents. So, in the news, like, I've heard about this Cash Me Outside girl. She's a 13-year-old girl who expresses her individuality by acting like a thug or a gangster, and she physically abuses her mother. Her mother does hit her as well, and she breaks the law almost on a daily basis, stealing cars, breaking houses, Despite growing up in the middle class with a white family, she acts like she grew up on the streets and is a tough gangster that'll beat up anyone that gets in her way.
Remember, she is still 13, not even legal to drive.
People like this promote violence and usually disturb the public by fighting people for insignificant reasons like skipping someone in line.
Yeah, honestly, when push comes to shove, the girl would probably back out of a real fight with an adult.
Aren't you like a 4th degree black belt in Taekwondo? You would like destroy her.
I wouldn't want to go to jail now.
Ha ha ha. Well, in other cases, this is a very sensitive topic that I know will get a lot of hate and confusion. So, baggy clothing, oversized clothing, and torn up clothing, and also sagging pants. These are a lot of things high school students do when they're in and outside of school. It's more controlled inside than outside because in public you can do whatever you want. The authority hates this. The school board hates this because it doesn't look good to them. And this has a historical standpoint because a lot of poor families can't afford new clothes, so they have hand-me-downs that are usually oversized and torn up, or a lot of gang members wear its clothes in type of ways, and they also like to sag their pants. And today, a lot of high school students do this because it's popular and it helps them fit into society, but this is also bad for them because they're perceived by most of the public as unintelligent, bad, or poor. And this also restricts their future because most employers and schools don't like this type of people.
Man, this is a very different way of thinking. They are simply worsening the potential future of their lives. Well, folks, that's all we have on the Weebscast.
We'll see you next time!